It's such a pleasure to be here, and I have a lot to cover and share, so I might as well get started. What we're going to talk about is popular book writing, which I've done a fair bit of, and that's actually served as a background for a lot of the other work I've done. Then that will lead on to making massive open online courses and a little bit of information about that. Public speaking and how that might work for you. Media outreach. So, you know, how do you reach out to NPR and some of the different kinds of venues that are available? And lastly, the pluses and minuses of using social media. Now, for me, this is me getting ready to go to my day job, right? So you're all very familiar with that here in Michigan. And as David mentioned, I co-teach this course called Learning How to Learn, which is the world's largest massive open online course. And we have over 2 million students so far, and still growing all the time. My co-instructor in this MOOC is Terence Sanowski. He was the Francis Crick Professor at the Salk Institute. And he's one of only 12 living human beings who is simultaneously a member of the National Academy of Sciences, National Academy of Engineering, and National Academy of Medicine. So he's an extraordinary fellow. And that's one of the great things about working online, doing an online course, because it's not just helping students to connect with one another from afar, but also it's helping the faculty members themselves to connect. And this is Terry going to work at his day job. So it tells you really different backgrounds, and you can connect through this kind of online outreach. Now, I was asked, I was very surprised. So I was asked to speak at Harvard. And I thought, Harvard? You know, here I am, just this little Midwestern professor. You know, I was very nervous. And so I go in, the room is packed, standing room only. And I'm like, what the heck? Why is there so much interest in this talk? And it turns out that our one little course, Learning How to Learn, made for less than $5,000, mostly in my basement, had on the order of the same number of students as all of Harvard's MOOCs put together, made for millions of dollars with hundreds of people. So what this tells you is something I think that's very important, and that is anybody can do it. But not everybody does it. So what I want to do today is to try to share with you some of the things that have happened to me or with me, and that have unfolded, in the hopes that it might give you some ideas of things that might work for you in your own efforts to reach out and have an impact with the public. Because after all, as professors, in fact, in life, we would all really love to have an impact. So I would like to point out that there are lots of ways to grow your impact. So I'm just giving a few ways that have worked for me, but hopefully, again, this might just give you some ideas that might resonate for you. Now, stepping back a little bit, as college professors, we are often taught to chase two rabbits. The rabbits we chase are getting funding and getting journal publications. That's what we are rewarded for. And unfortunately, what can happen is, as we go through our careers, we can kind of end up going, you know, that's the rabbit. We got to chase those two rabbits. That's all we do. And what that means is that by the time we get tenure, we've been trained, and we just keep chasing the same rabbits. But post-tenure especially is a time for risk. And so the kinds of things I'm going to be talking about are the kinds of sort of well-reasoned risks that can really expand your career. Or certainly they have worked for me. Now you might say, look, I'm a busy worker, or I'm a college professor. I just don't have time to do the kinds of things you're talking about. Well, one thing is, I think that's really not true. I would like to refer you to a great book called Deep Work by Cal Newport. Cal is a professor of computer science at Georgetown, and he does things like write 5 journal papers in a year while working on this book, while also having a very happy and fulfilled home life with his small children. And this book is great because he gives you wonderful tips on how to accomplish that, because it seems unbelievable, but it's a really good book. You might also say, well, if you reach out to the public, you're gonna get known as kind of this popular kind of person, and it's gonna not be good for your career, right? But actually, I can say I'm a fellow of the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers, which is one of my top, it's my home organization, as well as the American Institute of Medical and Biological Engineering. And so, in other words, I've gotten to this very credible position in part because of the outreach I've done. So, kind of opening your career to doing something a little bit out of the ordinary can benefit you in unusual ways. I've also won, for example, the Chester Carlson Award for Technical Innovation in Teaching. These kinds of things, and a number of other awards besides. And again, all of these things are because I'm not doing the usual academic approach, or I'm doing something beyond the usual academic approach. So let's dive right into popular books. How did I get started writing popular books? Well, before I even begin that, I should say, popular books. Why? I mean, the typical academic, a lot of time, the academic response to popular books is, we just don't do that, right? We're doing our research, and popular. And so, indeed, there is a stigma sometimes in academia, which is a sad one because there's so much to be gained. But there are some bad aspects of writing popular books. And the first one is that a typical popular book sells around 2,000 copies in its lifetime. So with 8% royalty, or something along those lines. So that means you can spend years slaving away, and all you get is a pittance, right? So it's kind of like, why would anybody want to do this? Well, there are some good aspects to writing popular books. And the first one is that they can open professional doors for you. Anything that's halfway decent, there'll be these unusual doors, as you'll see, that can open up for you. They also open doors for public speaking. It's often been said that you don't make the money off the books, you make it off the public speaking. Well, actually, you can make it off the books pretty good, but public speaking can grow as well from, and quite nicely from writing popular books. Also, every MOOC I have made, it has always been based on a book that I've written. It makes it a lot easier for you to create these kind of very popular courses if you've thought everything through in a book. Now, I think one of the best things about writing writing a popular book is that it gives you great new perspectives on your subject. You just don't realize it, but you get boxed in by just talking to students and not really writing in a way that a broader audience can understand what's going on. And in fact, we often, as professors, we get fooled by the fact that we're used to teaching caged students. Now, what do I mean by that? Your typical classroom has something like, it's got some 18 to 24-year-old students, and they are forced to be in the classroom, and they have to buy textbooks. So in your mind, you can't help but, if you're a professor, kind of thinking, hey, you know, if I write something that's kind of textbook-like, people will have to buy it anyway, right? No matter how bad it is. And so you can write stuff that's not very good, that's not very readable, and then you can end up being surprised. Because the reality is that the whole audience of people who read popular books is something like this. It's like 18 to 85-year-olds. So it's enormous, and these are free-range learners. They don't have to be in a classroom. So you like have to write in a way that they find it interesting. And this is a little bit of a change, I think, for some college professors. Certainly for me, when I was writing popular books, I would often find myself writing for students instead of writing for people as a whole. And my editor would catch me on that. So that's something you may want to watch if you are writing in a more popular way. So how I got started? Well, when I was true confessions time. I'm a professor of engineering now, but in my former incarnation, as I was graduating from high school, I was terrible at math and science. And so I thought, you know, I can't do anything technical, so maybe I'll learn a language. But I couldn't afford to go to college, right? So I enlisted in the military, in the Army, and went to the Defense Language Institute and learned Russian. So after I got out of the military, I ended up working on Soviet trawlers up in the Bering Sea. And well, I wrote a book about it. And it was hard to get it published. When I first wrote it, I sent it to, I got an agent, and they sent it, and it made it well up the chain in several big publishers, but they would always say, there's too much drinking going on. You know, and then they turn it down. It's like, oh, you write about working with the Russians without me writing. So anyway, I put it in a drawer. And I thought, you know, it's a lost cause, and the wall came down, nobody was interested. But my husband, of course, he's like, you know, that's a pretty good manuscript. You should really give it a try. And somehow it finally clicked. I should try and send this manuscript to a university press, right? So that's how it was eventually published, was through Washington State University Press. And you know, you don't make any money or anything like that. I mean, I was just so thrilled to have it published. And for sure, having your first book published it really helps you get your foot in the door. So then, so long story, but I came around and I changed my mind around, and then I began to study engineering, and I became very successful at it, to my surprise. And came here to Oakland University, got my doctorate, and while and then I was offered a tenure track position here. So while I was working as an assistant professor of engineering, I ran into this kind of nasty person. I mean, I'm sure none of you have ever met anyone like this. And so I'm not talking a psychopath who like will, you know, kill you as soon as look at you. I'm talking the kind of person who is really nice in meetings or wherever, and then they turn around and they're just completely different behind your back, and they do really nefarious things. So I kept wondering, you know, why do people do these kinds of things? And so I thought, wait a minute, I'm an engineer. I should be able to go and look this up in research, right? And find out what science has to say about what nasty people do or why they do it. But there's a challenge though. How do you go look up mean people on PubMed? I mean, you don't go to PubMed and go, oh, mean. Yep, there's a whole subcategory of mean, right? So I knew I needed some kind of term And so I looked and looked, and I found this term called malignant narcissism. At that time, there was this term in psychology. It was used everywhere, and there were thousands of research publications on malignant narcissism. And I thought, that's it. I'll just take that term, type it into PubMed, and I've got it, right? I'll find out what science has to say about, and there's thousands of research publications in psychology about it. So I type it into PubMed, and you know how many research publications, scientific research publications on this? 0. None. So it's like thousands and thousands of papers, psychology papers, with no scientific foundation whatsoever. And I thought, that's kind of interesting. In fact, I thought it was so interesting that I began to work on a book about it. And it was a stupid thing to do because, who is ever going to read an engineer's take on the discipline of psychology, right? And besides that, it's not really, it isn't like a set topic. It's like a question that falls between the cracks. And, I was working to get tenure. My father was ill with Alzheimer's, right? And so, I had 2 small children, wonderful husband, fortunately. But all of these things, I just couldn't stop researching this. So for 6 years, I worked on a book about this. And so then I found a literary agent, right? Because I'd been away for a long time, so I kind of had to get a new one because my old ones had retired. And he sent it out, the manuscript out, to 42 different publishers. So pretty, he was a very persistent agent. And so on the 42nd one with Prometheus Books, I hit. They took it, right? And the book was published as Evil Genes, and this is a kind of an ironic subtitle. It's Why Rome Fell, Hitler Rose, Enron Failed, and My Sister Stole My Mother's Boyfriend. So actually the whole title is really deeply ironic. If you pick the book up, you'll see that what it is a balanced examination of what do genetics have to do, what does environment have to do, with why mean people do what they do. And I was surprised, but those 6 years really paid off. I got some wonderful endorsements. So for example, leading psychologist Steven Pinker wrote a great blurb. So I got a lot of great endorsements from good psychologists, good psychiatrists, and so forth. And what this did was something even more for me. It meant that I had a very good understanding, growing from this, of neuroscience, genetics, psychology, and the discipline of psychology that I had never had before. So then I thought, I'm working away, busy getting tenure, and then a friend of mine said, Barb, you know what? We got to do an edited volume on career development in bioengineering and biotechnology. And I just thought, I don't want to do that. I mean, it sounds really boring, and I just don't want to do it. Well, he's a very persistent friend, right? So he worked on me for about a year, and I kept saying no. And finally I realized, this book's never going to be accepted. Just say yes, and then he'll go away, right? So I said yes, and immediately the proposal was accepted, right? So the book came out from Springer with Guru as the lead. He did the bulk of putting things together, and from Guru, kind of between the both of us, we kind of figured out how do you do edited volumes. And I found out that edited volumes are great because they help you piece together your thinking about a topic. And so then I couldn't help it. And I was kind of like, I'd written Evil Genes, which was kind of an exploration of the environment and biology of nasty people. But then some people would ask me, they'd say, well, how come good people do terrible things? I mean, like, all the Germans weren't bad people, but they did some really bad things. I thought, you know, that's a really good question. You know, I think I want to explore that question. So I put together, I knew how to do an edited volume, so Guru and I and some others put together a new edited volume, and this was on pathologies of altruism. In other words, how good intentions can lead you astray. And I thought, wow, you know, I've got this, it came out from Oxford University Press. You can see it has some really great, well, you probably can't read them, but like Edward O. Wilson from Harvard said, what a wonderful book. Dr. Keltner, who's from Berkeley, Greater Good Science Center, said it's the best book in altruism over the last 15 years. And now, simultaneously, though, I did this other book called Cold-Blooded Kindness. So that was going to be my popular book, right? Got my heavy academic volume that won't sell at all because it's academic. And then I've got my popular book. Well, guess what? The popular book didn't sell at all, right? Because it just, it was the story of a killing in Utah by a woman who claimed, you know, to be helping others. And it just didn't fit with the zeitgeist. But pathological altruism got a major write-up in the New York Times. And I think part of it really involved the fact that I worked hard to make it very readable, not a typical academic volume where you can't really understand half of it because it's really heavy-duty jargon. So, so for example, the New York Times, Natalie Angier wrote a scholarly yet surprisingly sprightly volume and went on along that vein. The Wall Street Journal wrote a great article about it, calling it a simple concept that could revolutionize scientific and social thought. And that was by a fellow named James Taranto. You can see him here. And you will see that name again later on. So how did he find out about it? I thought, well, you know, James Taranto, I don't know him, but maybe I can send him a copy and he might like it. He liked it a lot. So, then, to my surprise, I was invited to speak for the National Academy of Sciences and then to write an article for the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. So all these kind of crazy things that I would just do on the side were the ones that really seemed to get attention more. And it was while I was at the National Academy of Sciences that, it's kind of funny. So I gave my presentation. Of course, it's kind of controversial because how could altruism be harmful, right? So sure enough, the audience kind of came back with some, you know, not very friendly questions. But my moderator was, he like lobbed me these really nice, easy, good questions. When the audience would be kind of nasty, he was, oh, wait a minute, I got another question I want to ask, right? I mean, he was just like wonderful. And I'm like, who is this guy? Well, that guy turned out to be Terry Sanowski. So that's how we met originally. And indeed, when we were talking, Terry said, Barb, this is great research. You know, there's this other problem in this country, though, that is incredibly important, and that is math and science education. And I said, well, Terry, it just so happens I'm working on a book about this. And he goes, well, could I write the foreword? And I said, well, can I just die and go to heaven? And so, again, it's these kind of unusual things that one might do that can lead to really great friendships and colleagues and collaborations. Now, keep in mind, I'm just an engineer. So everything I'm doing is growing from the fact that I'm trained as an engineer. Now, I think it's valuable to recollect Thomas Kuhn's Structures of Scientific Revolutions, where he in this seminal book, he analyzed why are major scientific breakthroughs, how do they occur? And he found that they occur in two different ways. One is that the people making those breakthroughs are so young that they haven't yet been indoctrinated into whatever the disciplinary rigor and forms are. But the second way is that the people have not been trained. Actually, their original training is in a different field from the field they're looking at. So if you look in an interdisciplinary way outside of your field, that can help you to look in new and fresh ways, no matter what your training might be. So along the way, I will mention, if you do anything where you're doing something a bit different, you will definitely experience slings and arrows. There's a wonderful book called Everything and More by David Foster Wallace, and it has an introduction by Neil Stephenson, the great science fiction writer. It's awesome. I totally recommend this book. And the foreword is so terrific because in it, he describes how academics can be so catty about if you are reaching out outside your discipline, oh my gosh, they will eat you alive because they don't want somebody stepping on their disciplinary turf. So, just realize to begin with that these kinds of things can happen. And indeed, they did happen to me. So for example, I will not name names, but I remember Brad Roth sending me an email once and going, have you seen this review in a major scientific publication of your book, Evil Genes? And it was by this fellow who's at a super distinguished university, and he's a distinguished professor in the history of science, a professor in philosophy, history, and psychology. I mean, it doesn't get bigger, really, than what this guy was. And he'd written a review of Evil Genes, and he was scathing. I mean, it was like, this is the worst thing I could ever imagine. And the only problem was, if you read his review, it was clear that he never even opened the book. He just sort of said, let's see, Evil Genes, she must not be talking about the environment, and she's just an engineer, so let's just start lobbing stones based on that. We don't have to bother to read the book. So I contacted the publication and said, you know, there's a little problem here because he hasn't actually read the book. And so they allowed me to write a rebuttal. And in this rebuttal, I took the high road, was very kind of dignified about trying to point out nicely that he hadn't read the book. And so we corresponded. And he was really kind of a little snooty. And he was like, you are just so nice about things, right? I remember that. So then a couple years later, Pathological Altruism comes out. So here I got this book, and I write him, and I say, remember how you were saying I was so nice? Well, I edited this book with this group on this, so maybe you'd like to write a blurb for this book. And he did. And it was a really nice blurb. So you, again, just expect that you, if you do something unusual, you will definitely feel the slings and arrows. I like to think of it like this. You can always tell the leaders by the arrows in their back, right? So then I found that I was getting a little bit tired of writing about nasty people and bad things. And one of my students happened to ask me, he found out that I had changed from being just a linguist to becoming an engineer. And he said, how'd you do it? I thought, that's an interesting question. How did I do it? I wrote him a little email back, and then I thought, yeah, I like to write books. This is really a good question. So then I decided to begin researching this area and to write a book. And I didn't realize it, but there's actually a lot of knowing about neuroscience, as I had learned from some of the previous books, knowing about education, knowing about STEM at a very high level, all of these kinds of things were really directly relevant to the book that I finally wrote on this, which was A Mind for Numbers. Now, you should know something. When you are an author, you don't get to choose the title of your book. Only your publisher. So it's like, this is the most boring book title that you could ever imagine, right? But because I launched it simultaneously with the MOOC, the Massive Open Online Course, Learning How to Learn. Pro tip, if you have a book and you have a MOOC, name them the same thing, right? So I didn't do that, but anyway, this book has sold over 250,000 copies worldwide, translated into 13 different languages so far, and it's really, really done well. I then wrote another book, that's also done well, on sort of how do you change your brain? How do you change from one kind of person to another? And then, so again, my husband had been bugging me, and this time he was bugging me because he's like, you should write a kid's book, a kid's version of A Mind for Numbers, because that's so popular. You should do that. And I thought, I can't write for kids. I'm not a kid's writer. I mean, I know my limitations. Finally, it occurred to me, well, just like get a children's writer to write with you. So that's the next book that's coming out is Learning How to Learn, and it's with children's writer Alistair McConville, and I'm writing it with Terry Sanowski. Also, it's got some really good neuroscience told in insanely zany and fun ways with zombies and neuron aliens where the dendritic spines are are toes and so forth. And oh, the illustrations are awesome. But this book is meant to help kids know how to learn. Can you believe there is no textbook, no book for kids on how do you learn effectively based on knowing how your brain works? Can you believe that? I mean, we go through, what, 12 to 16 years of higher education, and there's no books on like how to learn effectively based on neuroscience. It's a little crazy. So anyway, I'm very excited about this book, and it's already done very well. It will be coming out in a number of different languages. So August 7th is the pub date. So the moral of all of these stories are these. Writing books opens doors for you. Even when you think that you're just sitting in a closet and who's ever going to read this, if you just kind of keep going, you'll learn valuable lessons, and you can be surprised at what can happen. Don't be afraid to think beyond your specialty. In fact, those kind of really wacky little questions can lead to finding really interesting topics to write about that nobody else is writing about. Outreach to the public, as I've found, it provides a fantastic way of being interdisciplinary. And I mean, that's all that, that's being so profoundly pushed because it is very important to be interdisciplinary. You don't just have to like talk to somebody in another discipline. You can kind of try and start exploring that other discipline, and you can be surprised at how much that can add to your career. Now, I should mention the importance of a platform. One great thing you have going for you if you are any kind of university professor is that you have a platform, something that establishes your credibility. A lot of books are out there. I mean, anybody can publish now, self-publish. And so what's the first thing you do to kind of triage and find out whether something is worth reading? Look at their platform. So, so you're lucky because you have a good platform just by virtue of being affiliated with the university. Now, the first thing you do if you are trying to write a book, get this book on how to write a book proposal. So it's a really, I think it's an excellent book. One of the things you may sort of blow off is the section on doing market analysis. Market analysis is the very first thing you should do before you even start thinking about the rest of the book that you're going to write. Because you want to know, is somebody already doing what you're doing? That's going to shape everything you do. So do that first. How do you get a literary agent? Unfortunately, my agent for Evil Genes, who was a great guy, went into the cooking business. So I had to find a new agent. And oh, really? He's very good with titles too, so I'm sure it would have a good one. But my agent is a woman named Rita Rosenkrantz. She specializes in nonfiction. She is awesome. And I met her by going to a literary conference. So that is a really good way to meet. You don't have to like go to lots of literary conferences. Just pick one. There's a good one for creative nonfiction. You can attend that. I met Rita at the Virginia Festival of the Book. And I remember she was on a panel, and it was on agent integrity. She's like the most integrity agent you could find. And I thought, wow, she looks so cool. I'd love for her to be my agent. And then, but I was too shy to go. And then I made myself to go to an event that evening. And there she was. And I'm like looking at her, you know, too shy to go over. And she comes over. And so anyway, you know, that's how we got to talking. So literary conferences are really good places to meet. Now, as far as academic writing goes, we know we have stellar and average and awful academic writing, right? And then when it comes to popular writing, we've got bestseller, marketable, horrible. And the thing is that if you are a stellar academic writer, you are pretty much a horrible popular writer. So the best thing I can recommend to you is get this book on writing well, which is called On Writing Well. And it's great. It will get you started. Sometimes people just dive into it and think, wow, I'm a professor. I should be able to write popular stuff. And you just can't, not unless you take some time to really learn about it. Now, you may think, this is a waste of my time. I've got to do my research. This is not going to help. But actually, it's very synergistic. If you learn how to write better for popular audiences, it will absolutely, unquestionably improve your grant writing and improve your journal publications. So nothing is lost by doing this kind of thing. I should mention that there are literary agents who specialize in marrying together academics with professional writers. And a good one is David Muldaur. But before you reach out to him, or if you're interested in that kind of thing, just kind of consider whether the topic you are interested in is actually something people really want to read about. You're not going to have a really big audience, you know, for some kind of little geological formation, if that's your specialty. It has to be something that's going to be interesting to enough people that a publisher would be interested in acquiring that property. So as far as editors go, a lot of academicians I've met make the mistake of thinking, oh, well, I've got a publisher, so they'll do all the editing, right? No, it doesn't work that way anymore. I mean, editors don't do a whole bunch of developing and back and forth and so forth. Instead, what I always do is, or almost always, I hire my own editor. So I do not do things like go find a grad student, right? Because what's a grad student going to come do? They're going to say, wow, it's so good. You missed the period right here, right? You need somebody who's like a Rottweiler, right? Who's really going to dissect your material, and you have to be tough enough to take it, which most academicians are, because you've had reviewers come back to you. So, but hiring a good editor is a very good idea. To find one, ask friends and colleagues. Check the forwards and acknowledgments of books. That's a really good way to do it. There is an editorial freelancers association where you can also look up these kinds of things. So everything, it's funny because people, like I travel around the world now as the expert on how do you make massive open online courses that are really popular. And it's lots of fun. I mean, like, in 2 weeks I go to Monaco, right, for Microsoft, going first class, right? It's really kind of neat. And then, you know, off to all sorts of different places. Oh, I get to go to Qatar, so I've never been there before. But all of that grew out of writing books. So I think that's a really good way of doing outreach. So again, books led to the online world for me. And so I had my book. As I mentioned, I try to make sure that my MOOC and my book releases are coordinated now. So I had the book, A Mind for Numbers. It's coming out. You know, I was asked to be on Ira Flato's Science Friday. I was so nervous, right? And then I'm with this guy, Ben Carey, who also wrote a book about learning. He's with the New York Times. I'm like, New York Times, wow, you know, who am I? I don't have anything, you know. So I get to talking with Ben, and you know, I'm talking a little bit about the course, Learning How to Learn. And then I begin to realize something. Ben is like really intimidated by the course Learning How to Learn, right? The MOOC. And sure enough, my book is like so outsold. I probably shouldn't say that, but it's done really well. So what does this mean? It means that some of the outreach mechanisms that we have as ordinary professors can give you more opportunity for impact than being a top journalist at the New York Times. So what is a massive open online course, a MOOC? It's basically like having your own educational television show with endless reruns. The only investment you have to make is your startup time and the equipment. And as I mentioned, I mean, you know, the equipment is super cheap. You don't need to do it, to invest a lot in it. Now, there's almost 10,000 MOOCs out there now, and we're #1, yay! But one thing that I worry sometimes about is that some smaller universities, I think, tend to inadvertently marginalize themselves. So-called second-tier universities, I am totally convinced, unquestionably convinced, they have the best teachers. I mean, bar none. But what these smaller universities often do is say, we're not going to be involved in the world of online learning, not massive open online courses, because we will undercut our fellow faculty. So then that means they're not becoming involved in the MOOC world. And who is? The top universities, right? Like Georgia Tech now has an online program for software engineering that you can get your master's there for $10,000. And it doesn't even say you took the online program, and it's full, so you can take it for $10,000, or you can attend for $40,000 their on-campus program. The smaller universities, you're going to be competing with these kinds of things. So it's a really good idea to be involved in the world of MOOC making. It can be very helpful. 15 years ago, nobody ever thought that, you know, online buying would have any impact on malls or shopping in malls. Today, there's actually a website that is called deadmalls.com, right? Because there's so many malls that are closing down because it's more convenient to shop online. And so it's, I mean, when I was speaking with Microsoft, they were saying, well, we had to have some of our employees taking a college class. And so we said, you've got two choices. You can either find a local university with whatever kind of professor, whatever quality of teaching you might happen to come across, go there every week, back and forth, or you can take an online course from a really fantastic professor, beautifully laid out. Which one are you going to do? They all took the online course, right? Because it's really, it's convenient, and you can get very, very good quality instruction that way. So, I hope that, I think it's important for instructors to try to do what they can to avoid having their own universities self-marginalize. Now, the outreach potential, as I mentioned, for MOOCs is tremendous. You know, we're at over 2 million now, and just growing between 5,000 and 10,000 a week. It's just, you know, I sign up, whoa! It's kind of amazing. And what I do every Friday, for example, is I send out an email to, it's almost 1.3 million students now. So it's kind of, you know, I'm like, should I press send, right? I mean, sometimes you feel nervous about just sending to one person. I'm like, it's 1.3 million, right? One time we were driving along, it's my Cheery Friday email. So we were driving along, it was Thursday, I was editing, and then boom, hit a bump. There was suddenly a Cheery Thursday email. But I can send an email if I'm gonna be in Silicon Valley or Singapore or anywhere. I can send an email and say, hey, I'm going to be there this week. Would you like to meet up? And shocking numbers of people can show up at these events. So I don't care where I go, whether it's Cape Town or Jakarta or wherever. And so this tells you that there's an enormous possibility to create new communities around the world through these wonderful new outreach mechanisms. Now, in the back of your mind, you might still be thinking, you know, but online is never as good as face-to-face. So so one way we did this MOOC for so cheap is that whenever I needed an actor or actress, I'd like to get a member of the family to do it. So this is our older daughter, Rosie, and I needed somebody to model blocking out sound if you're trying to intently focus on something. So she has this little dweebish set of earphones. Just so happens she's got this huge set on her lap, and she didn't mind looking too dorky for this little video snippet. So at that time, she was in Oakland University, William Beaumont, wonderful school of medicine. And so she's now graduated, and she's off to Stanford and working as a resident now in Stanford, so we're very proud of her. But while she was at Oakland, so she was teaching, or she was sitting in an audience with 70 of her fellow medical students, just sitting away, taking notes, and they were being taught by this preeminent cardiologist. And he's teaching away, he suddenly stops the class, points right at her, says, you're the one in the MOOC. so this tells you that, I mean, it's that 18 to 85-year-old. There is an enormous audience for well-made learning materials that universities have not been reaching before. And making a really good MOOC is something that can benefit even the highest, most highly trained and prominent professional, like a premier cardiologist. So then you might say, well, yeah, well, we know that, but, what about the disenfranchised? Do you do anything for them? Well, actually, we do. If you look here, This is the Inclusive Higher Education Certificate Program members. They are individuals in Colorado with IQs of 70 and below. Formerly, these individuals were institutionalized. They had no possibility of really doing anything other than folding napkins. By taking Learning How to Learn, it was broken up in a special part for them. They can tell you all of the key components of learning. They think of themselves now as learners, and believe it or not, they are now beginning to attend college, taking college courses. And they think of themselves as learners, not as, no, I just can't do it because I don't have the IQ. So again, there's just these enormous populations we have never thought to reach before. The Learning How to Learn is used in the largest refugee camp in the world. It's also used in places like the Las Vegas jail. It's all sorts of places where universities have not previously reached out. Now, having a nice MOOC gives you some other little biddies. So for example, you can do nice research on online learning. So this paper, Creating a Sticky MOOC, was actually the most downloaded, one of the most downloaded in the top 10 for that year, for that journal publication. Why? Because I've mentioned it in my Cherry Friday email, right? And also, within the course itself, I was sort of a little bad. I did like this shameless plugging. I was like, see, and we're talking about active learning, and it just so happens I have this paper on active learning that I wrote in 2004, and it now has almost, it has 636 citations. And you know why? Just, you know, people are always seeing this. And I put a little arrow up, and it says shameless plugging, and it still works. So how can you do a MOOC? First thing is encourage your university to become involved in the world of MOOCs. So there's lots of ways to do it, but the more that the university becomes involved, the more doors become open for you as faculty members. You can also do it the way I did it, which was partnering with a colleague at a top-tier institution. So Terry Sinowski is at the Salk Institute, but he has a joint appointment at the University of California, San Diego. So with him, that's what opened the doors to allow us to create this MOOC. So remember, if you are creating great online materials, you're not just competing with Fred Burfel, who's got the other section, right? You are competing with other universities. You've got to create something that's actually interesting, relevant, well put together. And you're even competing with television and YouTube. Because, well, YouTube, you should know that they have, if you have 10,000 or more followers on YouTube, you get access to their studios. There's about 20 of their top studios worldwide. And that means you've got access to 8K cameras that cost $50,000, free studios, and you can use that to create great content. I'd love to see, I think the universities, if they have a studio where people can just come and create great content, that helps spur innovation. It certainly works for YouTube. I mean, they've got amateurs who are brilliant at their editing. So one mistake sometimes universities make is they're like, well, have the professor, they're a talking head, put a few bullet points up, maybe a picture, and then flip to the next one, and you just go through the whole course like that. It's like so boring. You just can't do that. So you need editors who are really innovative and progressive and forward-looking. And if you simply look at some of the editing that's taking place on YouTube, you'll get so many ideas of what can be done. So now let's switch to a completely different area, or somewhat related, but public speaking. So public speaking has been it's kind of funny because I'm always really shy, and but it turns out really well somehow. People just really seem to enjoy learning about things like learning or how to make MOOCs, or hopefully you're enjoying a little bit of today's. But anyway, the best way to get yourself started in public speaking, have a book. That means you have something to talk about. But if you do a TED Talk, that can be like a calling card that you can put on your website. And most public speakers have a TED Talk that gives an example of the kind of things they do. At Oakland University, we had a TED Talk series, which I think is kind of dying away. Hopefully it will come back because it gives great opportunities, I think, for people. If you are considering a TED Talk, Chris Anderson's book, TED Talks, is fantastic, so I highly recommend it. Nancy Duarte's Persuasive Presentations is also a great one. She did a TED Talk herself. That's can you imagine you're doing a presentation on how to do great presentations? I mean, that's nerve-wracking, right? But she did an awesome one. You can be invited for keynotes, for high-impact public venues. Here, for example, I'm speaking at the Smithsonian. It was their largest auditorium, completely sold out. So that was kind of a nice feeling, and it was a lot of fun. Here, I'm speaking for the Colorado Association of School Boards. Again, just a really. I have so many terrific and interesting experiences. As far as speaking agencies go, if you start doing anything at all, you may get contacted by a speaking agency. I myself do not use a speaking agency because usually there's a ceiling on what venues will pay, and a speaking agency takes 20% off the top. So if you already know kind of what that ceiling is, you're just losing that ceiling. And what works for you is great, but it's so simple. Yes, I will come. How much you charge? Well, here's what I charge, and then it's very, very simple to do. So here, I don't know if we have the sound hooked up. Let's see. No, we don't. Okay. Well, there was this wonderful music. This is me in Sao Paulo, just standing around looking at a street festival, right? I go pretty much all over the place. There's just a list of a few of the recent places. I just love it. I mean, here I was helping out at the Universidad Francisco Marroquín in Guatemala, and there I am just to say thank you. They flew my husband and I up to Tikal to spend several days with the top tour guide in Tikal, and it was like, wow, this is really pretty fun. But I want to emphasize that I am a very normal, just an average kind of person. Really, this is something that a lot of people can do if you just kind of start thinking and being willing to take a few risks and do some outreach like this. It's really within your grasp, very much so. So switching now to media outreach, there are 3 major papers in this country that really have an extraordinary impact. First, of course, is the New York Times. They did a major expose on my work, and they did it because they reached out to me. Now, so that's one way, is people can hear of your work and then they reach out to you. Then the other way, or another way, is Wall Street Journal. So they did a big, long article, and notice the name of the writer of that article, James Toronto. So those earlier relationships, they can create fruitful ways of outreach in the future. So one thing to be aware of is, for example, when I was speaking with him, I was very colloquial, right? Because you're speaking to a person. That's what went in the quotes. That's what went in writing. So just be really, really careful when you are with a journalist. Journalists have a job to do, and part of it is to make you feel really comfortable and then to put that all away and just do their job, right? So they'll be the friendliest, nicest, greatest people, but what comes out, you can never predict it. So just always be on your best possible behavior. It'll serve you in good stead. The other major of the three is the Washington Post, which I've not been in yet, so we'll see what happens in the years to come. Now, a good way, it's hard to get them to do an expose on your work. You know, I mean, they just do what they want to do, and it falls in your lap or it doesn't. I remember the New York Times found out that the Wall Street Journal was going to publish an article, and they're like, how dare you? That's our competitor. And so they pulled it. I was like, well, that's too bad. Then they called back the next day and said, well, we'll still do it anyway, but don't do that anymore, right? So be aware that they're very competitive with one another. But anyway, so op-eds are a direct way that you can reach out to those kinds of venues. And if you get in any one of those three, it's really golden, right? So I've been lucky. I submitted one over the transom, and it was accepted in the New York Times. And then I submitted one over the transom, you know, with the slush fund. It's like 2,000. They get like 2,000 a day or something like that. So I submitted over the transom to the Wall Street Journal. It was rejected, but my publisher's publicist, you know, knew some people and said, well, you want to take one more look? And it was accepted there. And it does, if you're writing books or doing research, it can do really, the amount of feedback and so forth that you will get, it really has an enormous impact. But writing op-eds it's like a moonshot. I mean, you can put a lot of work into them, and it goes nowhere. So there's usually kind of you know, you start at the top and go down and so forth, work your way through the publications. But they're a lot of work, but if you get one in, it's really a benefit. So publishers, publicists this is part of why book writing is so valuable. To hire a publicist costs between maybe $20,000 to $60,000, depending on the outreach capability of that publicist. So who can afford to throw that kind of money into publicizing a book? I mean, for me, I don't want to do that. So, but the nice thing is, if you have a book with a major publisher, they do it. They have in-house publicists that they've hired on who do these kinds of things. Now, when your book comes out, you have about a 6-week window where that publicist is on your case. You know, they're working away. Maybe they'll do a little before, maybe a little after, but it's that 6 weeks where they really are, you know, sending out publicity kits to all the big venues and so forth, and trying. They're the ones who have the outreach, the direct connection to people like Ira Flato's producer and so forth. So, so this again is where books can be invaluable. The MOOC making world, they just don't get that yet, right? It's like you put a MOOC out, and they're not going to, you know, do publicizing of your MOOC, right? Because they've got thousands of other MOOCs to publicize. But books, for some reason, the publishers really take individual responsibility, at least during that 6-week window, and will help you kind of do outreach and have bigger impact. So, so for me, I found the best of all worlds. I'm an engineer. That means I'm lazy, right? So I just have the book, have a MOOC, have them come out at the same time. Anything I do as far as publicity for the book also helps the MOOC, and vice versa. So it's if the more you're involved in the online world, people love online materials. So I mean, if something breaks in your house, like your faucet, are you going to go find a book about how to fix it? No, you're going to go to YouTube and you're going to see how to fix it. You can learn things really quickly on YouTube. So, so that's why, I mean, that's the perfect example of online materials can be very, very effective. There's the world champion javelin thrower, Julius Igo. he learned how to throw the javelin from YouTube, right? So, I mean, you tend to say, no, you can't learn from things like that. You can, and you can learn very effectively. So as I mentioned, use your books to leverage your online efforts and so forth. That means you're kind of, they're doing the bulk of the work for you. And it just means that I don't just spend a lot of time doing that. Though there's the challenge of social media. And a lot of people talk about how to do social media and outreach. For me, as a professor, I just don't have the time. I can't keep up on all these different kinds of outlets. And indeed, publishers will say, doing analysis, that Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, those kinds of things are far less effective than a direct email. So the only thing I do is once a week I send out my Cheery Friday email. And it works. I mean, I get off the elevator, in the Marriott in Bogota, and a woman's like, "Oh my God, it's you! I just got your Cheery Friday email." So it does. Emails really do help keep a community together and build community in a way we've never been able to do before. So in conclusion, I'd just like to reemphasize that there are definite career synergies between popular books, MOOCs, public speaking, media outreach, and doing academic volumes, doing research papers, and even, maybe even especially, getting funding. So all you have to do is just kind of work to mitigate your career risk. So try to keep several things going. And I'd like to just say, reach out, take risks. We are at the ground floor of an impact revolution. What are you waiting for? Thank you so much.